Hello, welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm Andy Cleff. Joining me today is my brother without a C, Andrew Leff. How you been?
Good, brother. Good to see you.
And we're happy to continue our conversation with Gene Gendel. If you haven't met him, how to describe him, creative economy supporter. We can unpack that. Are we bartering for this show? I like your T-shirt. Is that?
NYU Athletics. Oh, the old one. Won't get into it, but
All right.
younger and better looking.
Frequent speaker and presenter at lots of Agile community events. We'll talk a little bit about his meetup at the close. And the reason we have you back, you're an Agile theater recovery specialist. And this is, getting rid of the drama. We talked in two previous episodes. We can now safely call this the trilogy. And we'll have links to those. We'll recap them in a minute. But you shared one of your superpowers, and as well as one of your weaknesses. Listeners, I'm not going to plot spoil. You have to go listen to find. But today, both for you, Leff and Gene, what is your favorite self-indulgence? How do you treat yourself after, I don't know, you've coached yourself out of a job, but they still want you around? Gene.
How do I treat myself when I get myself out of the job? So yeah, sure. We like to be quite frank, you don't want this to happen overly soon, especially if it's a coaching gig. You would expect this to be of a certain length, not just selfishly because you want to stick around for longer. You may do in a way too. You may want to do so in a way, but because you also want to ensure that your client gets some continuity and enough learning from you so they can get going on their own. But eventually you need to peel off, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no autonomy. I mean, I don't really. I look at this like as a like in the military terms, it's the honorable discharge, if you will. They don't just court-martial you and send you off like out the door. That would be a bad sign. Although we don't know if that was your fault or theirs. But let's just say it's a happy departure, right? I guess the way to commemorate this would be to offer like a all hands on deck, free lunch and learn, or wide open, like doors wide open Q&A, or maybe writing a blog, or maybe doing something that kind of solidifies, commemorates your effort and your and your service to the client. Of course, you want to keep everything discreet enough, so you have to make sure you respect their privacy. But you do something to make this not just a bullet in your personal resume, but also something that you can, maybe a case study, maybe a case study that you can always leverage back and say, listen, that's what I've done for the past, for my past client, and these are the learnings. So you always want to leverage your past work so that it somehow benefits you in your future engagement. That helps.
Yeah. It's nice to put a celebration around it.
Yeah.
Get a milestone. Leff, what is your favorite indulgence? I have some suspicions seeing your other personality showing up, but I don't know if that's an indulgence if you buy a couple of pairs every week.
Yeah, so you're get out of my head, but I think in that same mindset as we were talking earlier, right? Creativity. So to me, what language did we create when we were coaching with whatever organization we were working with? What icons, what imagery, and then creating a t-shirt or creating something to keep you connected. So when that person or that team or that organization revisits something, there's still a mark, like a marker there of your presence. So rallying around that and creating that connective tissue for when you're not there, to me is important. And having fun, right? It should be a fond memory. I mean, as an example, all the conferences you've ever been to, right? Like you can pull out the t-shirt and
Yes.
it snaps you right back to that moment. So having that kind of connection can be really important to remember the time you spent when things may feel off sort or off course.
I like it. The t-shirt, you pull it out, you're brought back to the last evening in the celebration, and hopefully you remember most of what happened. Some of these conferences, Yeah, maybe not. All righty. So we had two previous episodes. We explored how organizations often struggle with transformation. Leff, to get you caught up, I asked you to have a listen, and then here's pop quiz time. Give us the quick recap of episodes 1 and episode 2. Gene and I will be your graders since we were present at both.
Wow, I feel like I'm on an interview, but with friendlies. So I think in the first episode, you really dove down and explored how traditional HR policies and financial structures often become, those roadblocks or those impediments to meaningful transformation. So it can slow down or stifle transformative behavior and activities just due to older traditional ways of managing things. So you also dug into performance reviews, which is an interesting topic. I mean, that was super interesting when it comes to really, the budgeting cycle, the amount of waste, and how that impacts transformation or accelerates or decelerates. Also, Jay brought in some interesting perspective about why organizations typically treat HR and finance as untouchable, right? Even though they're critical, right? Points of meaningful change. So it sparked something in me because the majority of my career has been spent in financial institutions, large, huge financial institutions, and it's very interesting. And I will not continue to pontificate on this, but it's very interesting to see transformation occur outside of financial, right? Outside of the budgeting cycles and all the things that need to support transformation, yet that stays very traditional. So it is a very interesting conversation, and I think that could be an episode 4, teaser alert. And in the second episode, you really dove into what true product orientation means beyond just surface level change, right? Like window dressing. So Gene went through and unpacked the difference between genuine product teams and what he calls productization saga. Sorry, that's a mouthful.
Right?
Where organizations simply relabel existing component, again, touching into the money and how things flow and achieving authentic product centricity, or just engaging in agile theater, or just product theater, or just theater in general, right? We're going to tell you what you should hear, but we're actually not going to act on any of it. Anything to add? Did I sum it up okay? Did that kind of hit the first 2 episodes?
You're getting head nods here. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Well, I would encourage anybody to listen to those first 2 episodes.
Yeah, links in the show notes. So today in this third episode, we're going to attempt to bring it all together and talk about organizational design and how it's critical for sustaining agility. Like after we all leave, after our engagement, you don't want it to all fall down. We're going to challenge some common assumptions that it's all about mindset. I'm using air quotes because I don't even know what that means anymore. And instead, explore while structural changes really must come first. And then throughout the discussion, hopefully we shine some light on some practical things you can do if you're a leader at any level in the organization by position or influence or voice, and you want to create an environment where little a agility can truly flourish. So let's talk about organizational design, Gene, as the foundation for sustainable change, and help us understand why it's so critical. You have used a powerful metaphor about growing flowers in a desert. Can you expand a little bit while design comes before mindset change?
Sure. So oftentimes people think that you can take your existing org structure, and let's talk for a minute about a large, long left established company, from thousands to tens to hundreds of thousands of people. And it's just just easy to walk into this company and somehow influence people to change their culture and mindset. Now, there's an old expression, when you're in Rome, you act like Romans, right? So what would make mature, adults, mature grown-ups, all of a sudden, that work for money, that work for compensation and for career, what would make them all of a sudden change their norms, values, behaviors, and cultural characteristics if the whereabouts and the surrounding environment doesn't change. So that's a bit of an odd, it's a hypothetical situation for those that think that we will just walk into the organization, we will miraculously influence people to think differently or to act differently or to walk differently. In my experience, for large companies, for large organizations, this is it's a bit of a purist idea. It's hard to change culture and behaviors unless you fundamentally change organizational structure that defines it. So if the three of us, want to form a small company, maybe a few other colleagues, we shall bring our own cultural beliefs, norms, values, principles into the org design, and that's how we're gonna start building our company. That's for a small company. For a large company, when we come in there, we act like Romans. In Rome, you act like Romans. By the way, I'm somewhat paraphrasing the, Longman's law of organizational behavior, number 5, that essentially says culture follows structure. For large orgs, for smaller companies, for boutique firms, for startups, it could be the other way around, but we need to be there at the moment of inception. That's how we can define it. So org design is the first order factor that defines organizational dynamics. To expect the behavior between the people that are part of this system that promotes and incentivizes them to act as a part of a much larger competitive hierarchical environment, I think it's a little bit unrealistic.
Yeah. Leff, you've got a lot of experience in the world of transformation. You've been on both sides as the consultant and as the in-house person. Share some experience, what you've seen when the, quote, change agents walk into the company, and where do they typically start? And then the counter question is, where should they actually start?
It's an interesting question and one that I've experimented around, and I don't know if I've found the sweet spot, but I will say I've had more success when the person that needs to make the decision is part of the process and not just saying, hey, we've hired a bunch of talented people. They're going to do lots of things, right? And then they're going to report back to us every month. You need somebody that is going to be willing to be the boots on the ground. So whether that's at the C-suite or who's ever controlling the funds to continue these efforts, they need to be part of it. They need to have the heart. They need to have the mind, and they need to have the desire to push through the level of chaos that transformation creates. If everything was perfect, you wouldn't be doing this, in my opinion. But we're always in a constant state of transformation. So how are we creating learning within our organization to be able to continue to move towards a direction or move away? So I often think, as a consultant, when I have my I have lots of bright and shiny ideas. I'm like a puppy. I'm super excited. I'm walking into a new organization. I have all this energy and I overload the system with noise. These are all the things we could do. Oh my God, that's too much, right? Like, and then you just get we're going to wait you out because you know what? You're only here for 12 months, if you're lucky. So I really do think it's a control of, and I use that word very very thoughtfully, right? You have to be able to control how much information and how much change you're throwing at people. And you also need to temper the appetite of the people that are driving the change to ensure that you can actually accommodate those things in a manner that people can absorb it. And I'll make one more soundbite, and I'll try not to go too far down this rabbit hole. But if we look at the current climate of media today, we are all overloaded with information. If you use that as an example of how we walk into transformation, statements of work from a consulting perspective, or you're hiring a new leader to come in and lead transformation, when you overload the system with too much information, it all gets lost. So really, what are you trying to do? And then how do you slowly move the needle, even though you feel like you need to be moving faster?
That segues nicely into a thought that I wanted to bounce off of Gene. You're talking about significant structural changes. In the previous episodes, we talked about HR and finance and all those stuff. How do you approach maintaining business continuity and the need to make a structural change to enable that cultural change that follows?
Okay, so first of all, if I did say something like this, I'd probably most likely said it in the context of controlled, ring-fenced, well-protected, real-life, production-ready experiment. And when you do something like this that is deep and narrow, systemic, organizationally deep, you want to ring-fence your effort. That also includes the number of people, head count, to a number that is actually sane, that's controllable. It would be very, very risky, almost obnoxious to say that we are going to change all of this in a heartbeat by flipping the switch for 250,000 people of a large investment bank. The degree of expansion of this experiment is actually very much dependent on what we're trying to do. In my world, in my experience, these organizational improvements should be done around products that we sell and or services that we sell with products, not just for the heck of it. But also it's important to say that we are going to do this deep and narrow as opposed to broad and shallow. We will ring fence a small, what's we sometimes referred as a parallel organization. It's like a Vatican in the middle of Rome. Want to really, really go deep and systemically improve certain things by minimizing asynchronous dependencies with the rest of the organization, although the some will still remain. And we would like to optimize around the, for example, in my world would be around the product definition and product development. So we build our organization the way it can optimally support a widely defined product, maybe not as wide as we would like it to be, like front to back completely. However, we want to define it much wider than we typically see at organizations when it's all done by components, by applications. And then building the org structure becomes secondary to defining a product. So first you define a product and then you build out your teams. So in other words, you can think of 30, 40, maybe 50, pushing really 60 product developers involved with some maybe users and stakeholders and some very minimalistic managerial function. But this is not the whole company. Could be just a tiny, like a 2%, 1% of, small fraction of your company size. However, for smaller companies, and numbers speak for themselves, for smaller companies, it would be more natural to engage entire companies. Like for a small boutique firm, or for a company like maybe between 50 and 150 developers and some supporting staff, I wouldn't split hairs on this. I would actually be looking at the entire company to be improved from the beginning. It would be organizational blueprint improvement altogether.
Love it. Leff, you've been in the trenches for a while. You've got the gray hairs to prove it. What are some of the common justifications that resist this type of deep and narrow structural change? And how do you address them?
Yeah, I think, a lot of this creates fatigue and change fatigue. I used to discount it, be like, all right, we can overcome that, but it's a real thing. And I think by not including some of the key resistors in the change, people that are really resistant to it, is a disservice. I like to buddy up with those individuals and just be like, beat this up. Let's beat up these ideas and let's figure out how to work together, or let's figure out how to be in the friction together so we can look at systemic change differently than you have experienced it in the past. I invite you in, right? We did a podcast years ago about inflict versus invite, right? Like we want to invite people in, and sometimes that can seem squishy. So I think too, and I won't take it here, but I've kind of removed, and I feel guilty about it, my coaching hat. I no longer use that term because it seems to create a resistance. So partnering, leading, helping, right? How do we start making some changes and invite people to offer what they would do from a solution perspective? Now, granted, as a career consultant, which is a good and bad thing, right? I feel like I can walk into a situation and assess it pretty quick just because of the broad spectrum of industry I've worked in. Now, that's not an egotistical comment, but I do believe from a subject matter expertise, some of us are trained in a way to look at organizational design and say, this feels weird here. Why are we doing it like this, right? So you can start to pinpoint those hot spots, create that heat map, and then you can start looking across the organization of how can we start to uplift these or at least expose it. High levels of exposure and say, yeah, this is broken, right? We can't fix all of this, but we can look at these other spots that might be a little bit more palatable with a lower level of disruption, and the blast radius will still be felt across the organization. I picked violence today. I don't know why I'm using all these
That's okay. Resistance.
terms.
It's in the world. It's everywhere. I remember reading a blog post not too long ago, and I think it was Ken Beck, and he was talking about an experience he had in the early days in his career, and he self-identified himself as a chronic complainer. And one day, like 3 levels up, called him in and said, "I appreciate your resistance, but here's the reality.
Yeah.
You have a point. But by the time I talk to my, 2 levels down and it gets to you, blah, 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 it's going to be so diluted. And by the time it gets back to me, let's shortcut the bullshit. I want you to complain and propose." And so there's incredible power in the resistance. There's information that you're getting from the system. If you squash it, you lose the opportunity to find a better way.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, Andy. And just one final point along that line, I think too, is really giving people an understanding of, listen, I need to ask for you to trust me, right? And I know that's a big ask, but the trust will lie within whether I can keep that trust embedded will be with the communication, with the transparency, with the level of care and feeding, right? To be completely open and honest about what's going on. So you're not kept in the dark. So you're not just going to wait me out and then you'll hear in a month or 2 months or 3 months, we're now shifting direction. So that to me is that organizational fatigue around so much change, whether it's constant leadership churn, leadership change in direction. Now we're a product organization. Oh, no. We're not doing that. We're a project organization again, right? So that teeter of flipping and flopping, how do we keep balance and order in a way that allows people to breathe and offer their feedback, but also know at the end of the day, we have to make decisions. We can't just let this live in perpetuity.
Yeah. I want to keep tugging on the practical aspect of org design changes. Gene, I forget if it was in show 1 or 2, you brought up beyond budgeting, Bjarte Bogness's approach, which I think is incredibly powerful. We haven't had him on the show. I remember doing a book club and reading his book when it first came out. I was like, yeah, that's going to help unlock a lot of stuff, and it ain't ever going to effing happen in some places. Can you share some examples where financial changes, policy changes supported your ideas around deep and narrow and ring fenced and the broader organizational change that really unlocks the power that we're talking about in product centricity?
Sure. Well, since I mentioned Bjart, he has done some great work, and I've had him myself as a speaker a few times, and he's a book writer. And so one of the biggest takeaways for me personally from his work, from his studies and research is that, you got to follow the money. And he did work with financial organizational structures in his past, not under the fancy umbrella of Agile, just doing good stuff. And what he has shared resonated so much. Like one thing I will say that really committed to my memory is that when it comes to finance and budgeting, you really have to budget products, and you have to budget those efforts that you see value in, those efforts that actually are aligned and consistent with product centricity and product development. He's also very big on incentives and compensations and things that actually may things that could get reasons that from which you may end up with system gaming and numbers fudging and turning finances into, forgive my French, SHIT show. Also, he's very big on moving away and stepping away from fiscal year-end Armageddon type of budgets. If you don't use it, you lose it. and going more towards cascading, rolling wave, dynamic budgets. So that's something that, I just kind of gave the credit back where it belongs, although I also have done a lot of work in research in this department, in this area, working with true product managers and true business people. And I realized that majority of product development efforts, especially for large organizations, they are product eccentric. They are not consistent with the way we define products, with the way we see cash flow. Budgets, traditional budgets come in the form of budgeting portfolios, to programs, to projects, to short-lived project teams. And it's orthogonal. It's almost perpendicular to what we actually sell and gain our revenue from. That is products. So one thing that I would like to say, hopefully, if nothing else, this will stay with whoever listens. We need to rethink how we budget work. And this really starts with properly defining products, understanding who our paying customers are. And if this is an internally facing product, we need to think in terms of how does this work, an internal product, help us save money or protect us from regulatory penalties. Somehow you want to monetize it, and then you tie it back to those people, those teams that work on the product, that develop a product. And surprisingly, budgeting then becomes a very natural, very easy thing, because now you know how cash flows, who makes this product a success, and then you can easily budget how much it will take you a year to continue doing product development, because you know who works on it. Those are long-lived, stable, steady teams, and you roughly know how much they get paid, plus some perks and buffers, and that's your annual budget to continue product development. And another aspect of this that I would like just to throw in a teaser and not go into detail, but just to mention, the way we incentivize and pay people should also depend on how successful our products are. So I'm going to say we need to think of subjective incentives and bonuses as almost like profit sharing policies that we have, the company would implement. So if a product makes $1 million, somehow it should translate into a revenue, and this profit sharing should be split in some way, percentage based perhaps, with those product development teams that are involved in work. And there are formulas how to do it fairly depending on
In Bjarte's work, he talks about maybe it's more humane, but a fairer way to distribute incentives so that all boats rise. It's no longer a competition that I've hit my numbers, the heck with you, Leff. It's shared. Like if for some reason your product is not doing so well, it is my obligation to work with you to help you along, and we both then profit from it when the incentives are divvied out, which brings up, Leff, some ideas about middle managers and their role as organizational structures change and they're no longer doing resource allocation and budget allocation. Talk some more about how that role evolves and what you've seen, both the pretty and the not so pretty.
Yeah, I mean, middle management is always, the frozen middle. There's so many names for it. Having been in middle management, it's an interesting position to be in because oftentimes you just don't feel like you can move the needle in any direction. So I think you get complacent. But when it comes to kind of where I see middle management really becoming pivotal is they become the blocking and tackling needed to insulate the teams or their team of teams or their individuals to really be able to continue to do the work. And they become the translation to manage up. To me, middle managers, in my experience, have not been great at managing up, which has hurt their ability to manage. So if you're not looked at as a leader, so that's why I actually don't even like the term middle management anymore. You're either a leader or you're not. If you're not seen as a leader, why? If you are in a management position, what are you doing to be seen as a leader in the organization from not only your teams, your direct reports, your employees, but from your leadership, right? What do you need to do to kind of break the chain of being middle management? That's the way that I see it. I like, me personally, I like a much flatter organization. You're accountable. You're not a middle manager, you're accountable. This is what you're accountable for. Are you meeting those expectations? If you're not, how can I help? Right? Or do you not want my help? So now I'm going to manage you out because you're a resistor in a way that I don't have time, right? Only have time for people that want to have that time made for them in that kind of mindset. So I think we let things linger too long without addressing them because of fear of friction. So a lot of middle managers, they could just be skating by because they just are complacent. But I also think it's a fundamental flaw in the management design of a lot of large organizations. They put people in management positions to lead people that should have no business being part of talent, like talent, right? I love talent. I love creating talent. I love looking for talent. I love encouraging talent. I love managing people in that way. You don't get a lot of that, at least in the financial world, right? It's like, what are you going to do for me in the time that you're doing it? And then go away. I don't want to hear from you again.
Yeah.
So
That's a whole nother show. How people who are stellar individual contributors get raised up and then thrown into this quote management position and not supported. And then they're like, what the hell? Managing humans is hard. Gene, you talked a little bit about stable teams, and what comes to my mind is a podcast we did, oh man, it's years ago, with Heidi Helfand about dynamic reteaming. And we've got one coming up probably next month with Sandy Mamali and David Moley about the wisdom of self-selecting teams. What organizational design elements, structures need to be in place for that kind of agility to happen?
Okay, so the question is how do what conditions are required to have dynamic reteaming?
Yeah, or self-selection, right? People are going to come and go. This idea that stable teams, it's not, we're not talking about static teams. They don't live for decades or years.
Let me take this up in a second. Yeah. First, if you allow me, I was just gonna say a little something about the middle management just because it's so near and dear to my heart. Um, there's a philosophy that I follow. It's job security, not role security.
Hallelujah.
Well, everyone should be gainfully employed if they're smart, clever, and useful people. But we should not be optimizing our org structures for the role security that we have traditionally. It's almost like we are saying it doesn't matter who you are and what you do. We just want to keep you, floating here because that's the traditional thing to do. Like, by the way, don't take my word, don't shoot the messenger. AI will take care of it naturally. So if you as a company are not preparing yourself now by flattening, by removing redundant layers, roles, AI will do it for you in a surgical way. So you're better off start doing this now in a therapeutic way. So not to say that some of these first line or middle managers are not gifted or not talented. Some of them are, but you have to properly use their talent, which, by the way, almost like it's a fair question to ask. If we talk about coaches and expect coaches to coach themselves out of the job, why wouldn't it be just fair to ask for managers to manage themselves out of the job in the same exact fashion? Or is the role so significantly different that management is perpetual? Begs the question, what about those self-managed teams? Like, when will they become autonomous? But to your point about dynamic reteaming. Now, first of all, we don't just build teams for the heck of building teams. We build teams for the purpose. And in my world, the purpose of building a team is to support product-centric development. That's majority of work that I do, most of the work. Then in that case, we first need to come up with a proper product definition and the blueprint of a team design that supports optimally this product development. Now, the actual effort of reshuffling and recastling individuals into teams going from single function specialty component teams, application teams into product/feature teams, that's the moment in time where you wish to run it in a like gaming/democratic way by doing self-team design workshop, by creating an environment where people coming from different single function specialty teams want to adhere to each other and form cross-functional teams. So that's an exercise we run actually in large scale Scrum, which I teach and coach. We run it as an event before we start sprinting. Now, anytime down the road, if you ask this question, shall we reteam dynamically as needed? Maybe, but only if as needed. So we don't just reshuffle people left, right, and center because the time has come. Unless someone really wants to move on and change their career and explore elsewhere, some maybe take advantage of career mobility, and that's a hard personal decision, that's fine. But other than that, we don't encourage just reshuffling decks. If the team is, if the product maintains its definition and front and back structure, and nothing significantly changes there, then why, if it ain't broken, don't have to fix it. Why change it? But again, the leg room is there, and the leg room is there, and flexibility is there if needed. If your product definition expands, and if you need new technologies, and if maybe you need to slightly reshuffle people, this opportunity should exist, but it shouldn't be an expected thing that we have people coming and going as through the revolving door.
Yeah, that's chaos.
That's chaotic. Yeah.
Yeah, you've talked about things broken, things working. Let's talk a little bit about measurement and the indicators. So let's suppose we've done the deep and narrow ring fence thing, product centricity. Gene, what are some of the things you look for, and maybe want the leaders in the organization look for, that indicate that things are working? Your flowers are growing in what used to be a desert.
Yeah, that's probably a very common question for many senior managers. Not always they are the same as leaders, but some of them are. Hey, how do we measure success? Are we actually moving in the right direction? Are we gaining traction with this new improvement? So 99% of the time, if this is a large company already, they're building something, they're shipping something, and customers buy something from them. So they are delivering value. So it's not so much the question of whether or not you're delivering value. It's the question of at what expense you deliver this value. Is it what's the a return on investment? What's your investment? So take any large financial institution, or even a product company, like a software product company, since they exist and they sell something, it means they have a product defined. Now, the way your paying customers define a product and the way these products are decomposed and understood internally could be two different things. And because of this asynergy and inconsistency, there could be lots of inefficiencies internally and lots of overhead, financial, cumbersome processes, convoluted relationships, stuff that makes your return on investment much lower, to the point that you may become less than competitive, and to the point that you could be beat to the punch by a competitor company. So lean and adaptive organizations do not carry excessive body weight. Think of dinosaurs as like, why did they go extinct at some point? They were big, they were massive, they were great for when the weather was great, but once it became cold, they turn out not to be as adaptive as other animals, adaptive as an agile. So speaking of agility and adaptiveness, what we talk about here, making organizations flatter, more nimble, it's actually consistent with nature. So you can't expect a dinosaur or a huge animal to be being able to turn on a dime for a dime and run away from ice age. It's not as easy.
Leff, what do you got to add? Success, failure indicators, dinosaurs, mammals, evolution. We can go any direction you want.
I know, right? I think logic has to play a part in how we measure things, right? Are we creating illogical things that just, when you're talking about, like, you just, as a big, huge monolith dinosaur, you're not just going to be able to run around and be agile and nimble. So are we creating measures that stifle us from being able to be nimble, from being able to pivot, from being able to move, right? So I hold a huge financial position in my organization as a product manager, right? I deal with budgets all the time. It's one of my least favorite things to do, because to me, it's a checkbox activity. So are people really understanding why we're going through the measures that we do to prove out that water is wet financially? Or are we creating measurements that connect us to actually our customers, our, our happiness, our quality, our throughput, our flow? Do we truly understand, right? To me, at the time of ROI, it's too late. We've missed the boat. So ROI is an indicator, but that shouldn't be the primary, in my opinion. So I firmly believe in logic. What logic are we putting into our measurements that connect us differently than just cap or OpEx, right? CapEx, OpEx, can I capitalize on these dollars? Do I need to reduce headcount because everything's overhead? All these things just feel yucky. And a lot of times those financial discussions happen behind closed doors. I often feel like when I meet with my finance partners, I'm negotiating a used car deal. Let me go back and talk to my finance manager. But I'm sitting right here. Why can't you talk to me? I'm the one that's managing the portfolio. That's okay. You sit there and just we'll come back with a new number that you'll be unhappy with. And I hate it. Either you have a seat at the table or you don't. That's the measurement I like. You need a seat at the table. And the fact that we don't allow more professionals a seat at the table when it comes to how do we measure success? I mean, ask a room of executives how they measure success. Ask them to define value, right? Like it really doesn't feel the way that we connect to value. It feels very monetary.
Yeah. Whew. My head's spinning. I'm looking at the watch. We're getting close to our target time box. What a journey this has been through these 3 episodes. First episode, we talked about HR policies and finance structures, how they can help or hinder, and they've reared their ugly heads again today. Second episode, we talked about true, genuine product orientation. Listen to that episode to get more details. And today, we're wrapping things up about organizational design. Gene, anything else that you want to add? I loved your metaphor about flowers and deserts. Really drives home why, for me at least, structure is so important. You keep throwing seeds on the desert floor and they're not sprouting, then you're like, oh, buy some more seeds or throw some more manure or, oh, wait, there's an ecological problem here. What would you add before we wrap up, Gene?
What would I want to say before we wrap up? Well, be safe, be healthy. Don't do safe, be healthy. But that's the point. I would like to say that, the Agile Theater, that is the overarching theme that we had for these 3 episodes, and the productization saga that we talked, I think, in the first or second episode. I want people to think more, more holistically, what they are trying to change organizational and the whys behind. I also want to encourage people, especially those that are in charge of these Agile theaters and they have some personal, local, temporary prosperity there. Think a little further out because, quite frankly, like all empires come to the point when they collapse. And all these fads eventually blow up. And resilience doesn't come from these fancy, monolithic, big bang transformation efforts. So I would really like to make them think a little harder. If they really want to serve their organizations, not just themselves, think slightly out of the box and understand why they're doing certain things. Also keep in mind something that will resonate with anyone who is very selfish. Eventually, and I'm not a fanatic of AI, because I know it's got lots of flaws and lots of things it has to improve about itself. But eventually, if AI comes into play and starts substituting humans, it will most likely go after those less than valuable and less than impactful roles and capabilities. So, like I said, nothing is forever, especially large organizations. Those senior executives that think that, oh, we're going to build another transformation center with lots of trivial roles. Well, if he was your own company, if he was your own budget and money, he probably would not do that.
Yeah.
And AI will come and do course correction in a surgical way eventually. So why wait for it? Why just not keep yourself healthy and prepare yourself for this by making an organization more nimble, more adaptive, more healthy.
Gene, a couple of closing questions for you, for people that want to learn more about those specific things. Do you have some resources you can recommend?
I run a very large, globally, like tens of thousands of people, if we combine them all, large-scale Scrum community. It's an organizational design, business agility, and product centricity virtual group. We started in person in New York City, New York, 11 years ago, but it has gone viral and global. So I recommend people joining that community and just getting exposed to lots of amazing, very impactful conversations and presentations. So that's again, community large scale Scrum, New York City and global. So that's got most, non-for-profit invitation, right? Of course, if people want to learn in depth, they can always, call upon us, and training, coaching, and organizational consultancy is also an option. But let's start with the community build-up.
Sounds great. Well, these conversations certainly given me a lot to think about and look at, and understanding how to thoughtfully apply the principles to the context that I happen to be in. So listeners, thanks for making it this far. We'll include links to the 2 previous episodes, Gene's meetup community. We've also mentioned some books today and in previous series, so they'll be in the show notes. Thanks again to both of my guests, Gene Gendel and Adrew Leff, and to our listening audience. If this is your first time, where you have been, subscribe, get the next pod. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a review or a rating. It really helps us bubble up in the ecosystem of podcasts. And if you really want to join the discussion about organizational design, structure, successes, scars, middle management, join us over on the Discord server. We're especially interested in hearing about your experiences growing flowers in what seemed like to be an impossible environment. And finally, listeners just like you help us cover our hosting costs. See the show notes if you'd like to become a patron. And for the cost of a cup of coffee a month, Jay will send you some good swag. Stickers galore. Socks. Do we still have socks left?
I think so. I think he's got a couple more pairs, and thanks, Andy, for hosting.
I really appreciate being here, being called upon. It's the honor. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Andrew, being a co-pilot in today's show. Hopefully, it's useful to our listeners.
If not, we'll hear about it. We crashed and burned. Thanks again. This is the Agile Uprising podcast. Finally signing out.
Thank you very much. Cheers.